Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And picking up on that editorial comment, I've been joining Senator Leahy and Senator Lee for years talking about this FISA court.
Yep.
And we now have an ample record here in this case and in a lot of others. 2002, the FISA court identified more than 75 cases in which it was misled by the FBI. Internal FBI review in 2006, dozens of inaccuracies provided to the FISA court. The list goes on and on. So let's have a fulsome conversation after this about the future of the FISA court and the representations that are made to it. Let me try, if I can, Mr. Horowitz, thank you and your team for being here, to go through a few points. The chairman gave an uncharacteristic, flowery, heated opening that went on for some 40 minutes and produced a lengthy record of emails from Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, which repeatedly demonstrated statements of hostility toward candidate Donald Trump. He went on to say these were the people in charge. When I read your summary of your findings, you didn't find either of them to be in charge, did you?
On this investigation, we did not.
Okay. When it comes to expletives, you also, on page 339 of your report, found some agents at the FBI who had an exactly opposite political viewpoint.
Correct.
And were very positive toward candidate Trump and very open in their use of expletives to demonstrate that.
Yeah. And those individuals, to be clear, were not part of the Crossfire Hurricane team, but were in a different field office interacting with the Crossfire Hurricane team.
And I hope we can all concede the point. We don't believe anyone in this capacity, this delicate capacity with life-changing decision-making every single day, should be so politically biased as to call into question their values and their character.
That's correct, and I made this point last year when this issue came up. Individuals at the Justice Department and the FBI are allowed to have their political views. They're allowed to be voters. They're allowed to be engaged citizens. They should be. They can't, though, tie their personal views to their investigative acts.
And I'm sure that's one of the things you've shared with Director Wray.
Correct.
All right. Also, the chairman made a point early on of talking about the fact that the Trump campaign was not notified of this ongoing investigation until a much later date after it had been initiated. And I would just say, be careful what you wish for, because there are those of us who look at the James Comey October 28th public declaration about the Hillary Clinton investigation as being deadly in terms of the outcome of this election. So this notion of the FBI publicizing investigations, making them known to many people, can cut both ways. It's good to know, I'm sure, but you run the risk that as more people come to know it, it becomes public knowledge. Is that an issue?
Yeah, look, we wrote the last year's report about that concern of what Director Comey did in that regard, and you obviously want to control information and make sure only the people actually need to know it.
So the point I'm trying to get to is the chairman's opening suggested a bias, at least in this instance, at the FBI and others, against Donald Trump that he believes was manifest in many of the things that followed. I could argue from our side of the table, we can find bias that includes Comey's statements, public statements, right before the election that really had, in many of our points of view, determinative outcome. Let me go back to the irrepressible, ever-present Rudolph Giuliani, because here's something. During the 2016 campaign, Rudy Giuliani, who was then a Trump campaign surrogate, bragged about having access to information about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails.
Right.
He teased in October 2016 that a surprise was coming. And on November 4th, after Director Comey sent his letter reopening the investigation, Giuliani said, and I quote, "I had expected this. Did I hear about it? You're darn right I heard about it," the mayor said. So how can we be dealing with those kinds of statements that long ago and still not have some resolution as to whether or not he was just bluffing or, in fact, he had moles in that New York office? If I remember right, one of Comey's rationales for his public announcement was, I couldn't do it through the New York office because it leaks like a sieve. Is there no investigation, or has there been no investigation of this?
So, as I mentioned last year when we released our report on the Clinton email investigation, we are looking at still that question, and the challenge of that investigation, as I mentioned back then, I'll mention again, is proving who spoke to whom and when, based on records at the FBI and understanding that there's rarely going to be substantive information we will get, for example, from toll records or others, but we will find out context, and we're trying to follow up. We're continuing to do that. We've issued 2 reports so far about findings we had of leaks and misconduct, and we have investigations ongoing.
Mr. Giuliani now professes to be President Trump's lawyer, and occasionally the president acknowledges that. Sometimes he doesn't. Are there any concerns that Mr. Giuliani may be continuing to improperly obtain information from sources in law enforcement not authorized to provide it?
I'm not going to speak to what we've learned or what we know about what our ongoing investigations, and I'm not investigating matters related to the ongoing Ukraine issues that I think you're referencing.
Let me ask, if I can, on this question of the problems within this case, particularly as they relate to the treatment of individuals who were engaged in it. And I'm thinking particularly of the ongoing questions about whether or not one particular individual was treated fairly here. Is it your conclusion that he was not Mr. Page was not a Russian agent? Or I should say, did not have important contacts that were not in the best interests of the United States with the Russian leadership?
I'm not in a position to assess that. What I can assess is looking at the evidence that the FBI put forward to the FISA court. A significant number of pieces of that evidence do not support their theory of the case. And that was never told to Justice Department lawyers, who are the ones who are the gatekeepers and have to be able to know that information to make that decision. They're the experts, not me.
Could we speak for a moment to the Steele dossier, Steele
Yes.
file in this case? I believe you had a pretty definitive statement about what impact that Steele file had on the initiation of this investigation. What was your conclusion?
In terms of the initiation of the investigation, it had no impact.
No impact.
No impact. It was not known to the team that opened the investigation at the time they opened it.
So you've concluded in several different ways that there's no evidence of political influence for the opening of this Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Let's see if there's anything else here. On this FISA reform issue, I can get back to that later, but one thing that's interesting here, and Senator Lee is not with us at this moment, he's introduced a bill which I'm co-sponsoring, which would give the Inspector General's office, in this circumstance, the authority to investigate attorneys.
Correct.
In the department. Right now, that's not allowed under the law, is it?
That's correct. It is not. And thank you for co-sponsoring the bill, as have several other members of the committee.
It seems to me to be obvious. Why do you know what the theory is behind their being separate and not subject to this investigation?
This is a legacy of history. Back in 1988, when the IG was created at Justice, the compromise was that attorneys would be carved out. By the way, so was the FBI and DEA at the time, and that we would have jurisdiction over everybody else. After the Aldrich Ames spy scandal, Attorney General Ashcroft actually changed that and gave us the authority over DEA and FBI. Congress codified it in 2002, but attorneys still a carve-out. We're the only IG that can't review conduct of all the employees in our organization, including attorneys.
And Attorney General Ashcroft was authorized to give you that kind of option?
Under the statute as it then existed,
As it existed.
he had the authority to do that. The statutory change took that away.
Mr. Chairman, I hope you'll consider that when we're putting together an agenda. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
service.